Welcome to New Lens with CommonGood Capital, where we talk with investors, RIAs, fund managers, and philanthropists about their experiences within different impact investing themes, as well as explore the power of stewardship and capital. I'm your host, Jeff Shafer, CEO of CommonGood Capital, and I'm here today with, and do you want me to call you Zachary or Zach?
Zach is fine.
Okay, Zach, and then Mannheimer.
Yes.
And normally I don't introduce people this way, but Mannheimer, where is that from?
Technically Mannheim, Germany, but accumulation of a lot of Eastern European places.
Okay. I would have guessed that, and actually Shafer is German, and it means shepherd, so that, I guess we have some commonality. But Zach is the founder and chairman of Alquist and 3D, which is a company that uses 3D printing technology to create exceptional design while lowering the cost of housing and infrastructure in economically distressed and underserved communities. He is also co-founder of Altus Community Studios, a social enterprise that empowers local artists, entrepreneurs, and activists to transform their communities through creative and collaborative projects. So I love hearing your background here. You must be a creative by nature.
Most likely, yes.
Yeah, that's what I figured. Well, thanks for joining us. And what's fun about this, we actually just did a webinar and you were on there, did a great job. And so now it'll be fascinating to hear a little bit more of your story. So start off and just tell us where you grew up, kind of where you went to school, and then just a brief summary of your career, and then we'll dive in from there.
Sure. So I grew up in southeastern Pennsylvania, just outside Philadelphia, home of the world champion Philadelphia Eagles. And I went to college at Muhlenberg in Allentown, Pennsylvania. I was a theater and philosophy major, prepared me for 0 careers in my life. And after I graduated, I moved to London for a bit and did theater over there until my visa expired. I came back to America and did what every other kid that went to theater school does. We went to New York and tried to make it on Broadway. Although my goal was off Broadway of doing pretty experimental theater. I ran theater companies there for about 10 years and then worked in restaurants because theater barely paid you anything. In New York, I realized very quickly that the last thing New York needed was another theater or another theater company. I wanted to be in a place where we would have more of an impact for the work that we were doing. So I didn't know where I wanted to go. And then you paired that with rising cost of living and everything else. New York, even back then, was becoming very challenging. So I left Brooklyn. I did a road trip to 22 cities around the country, and I chose Des Moines, Iowa to move to. Very, very different than my surroundings in Brooklyn. But Des Moines hit all my demographic boxes for what I wanted to do, and that's where I started a nonprofit that was based in cultural and educational offerings in downtown Des Moines. We opened up a space that catered to every walk of life. We had every type of artistic medium represented. We had sound recording studios, live music venues, a full black box theater, restaurant, culinary academy, circus academy, dance academy, comic book store, you name it, it was in there. And this really helped change the cultural landscape of downtown Des Moines. We did this in an old 1937 Art Deco firehouse that we purchased from the city. What I didn't know at the time was we were doing something called economic development. I'd never heard that term. It never came up in any of my theater or philosophy classes. Suddenly, I started getting calls from other communities, mostly rural, around the Midwest saying, hey, we have empty buildings on our main street. Could you come here and help us do something similar? And so I started a business that helped these communities grow. And at first, it was helping them grow with cultural concepts of creating business models for new theaters, cultural centers, restaurants, breweries, coffee shops, all the stuff to help attract and retain that next generational workforce. And that grew into these communities saying, hey, this is great, but we have childcare issues. Our hospital closed, our schools are underfunded, our streets are falling apart. And so we began to work with engineering groups and turn this into a master planning group that would help these communities grow. And these are really rural towns. Average size population for us was like 5,000. And it grew out of the Midwest. And soon we were doing this in 25 different states around the country, mostly in the Midwest and the Mississippi Delta. Meanwhile, the number one issue everywhere we went was housing. And they kept saying things like, hey, this is great, this new theater concept that you want to do, but if we don't have anywhere to live, why does that even matter? Which is a fair point. So we began to look at ways to drop the housing costs. And in 2016, during my research, I went to a seminar from a futurist, and he talked about all sorts of things. And one of those things was 3D concrete printed homes. This is 2016. And somebody in the audience raised their hand and asked the question, hey, how long until you think that this type of construction method becomes prevalent in America? And he said, well, given the cost and availability of land, zoning issues, regulations, unions, etc., I'm going to bet 10 to 15 years. And he was a good futurist because I think he was right on. Afterwards, I went over to him. I bought his book so he would talk to me. And I said, hey, your point about doing this in urban areas and taking 10 to 15 years, I think you're right. But I work primarily in smaller communities. Don't you think that this could take root there sooner because we can move faster in these places? And he said, well, I never really considered that. You might be right. And that set me off on 4 years of R&D. I traveled around the world, met with all the major manufacturers of 3D equipment at the time, of which there weren't many. We ended up getting a grant in the state of Virginia to 3D print our first homes there. And I started the company in late 2020, specifically to address the housing crisis.
So I got to stop you there for a second. What's fascinating to me is, obviously you and I have met before, but I didn't know all that background. So my question was, or comment is, you must be creative. Yes, you answered that question very quickly. But what's intriguing to me is somebody who's been in the financial world for the last 28 years, to hear your story, to hear your training, and to see how your creativity and innovation is being used to make a difference in the world it's inspiring. On the other hand, it kind of breaks some of the stereotypes in the sense that I've sat in the financial world where it's all about money and it's all about getting your greatest return. And so to see you build what you are building to solve a problem, and obviously I'm assuming you need to make money in the process, but it doesn't sound like making money was your number one goal. Not that there's anything wrong with that.
There isn't.
Yeah, but it's just fascinating how you come to this. And so here you are, I'm assuming in the space, just based on what I've heard and read about you, you're probably one of the experts in the space, and you were doing what you were doing the previous 10 years or whatever it is, and building wasn't in your training. But look at you today.
The method of how you implement your concept is irrelevant as long as you can find the most efficient way to do it. If you had asked me 20 years ago if I would be 3D concrete printing homes anywhere, I would have said, what is a 3D concrete printed home? But I would have said, you're crazy. There's no way that I would be doing anything like that. And so for me, this is a very linear path. To anyone else, it probably seems crazy. That's the pathway you go. My goal is and always will be to help create community. I try to do that everywhere I go. And at the moment, I'm kind of at the base level in my mind that you can't really have community unless you have places to live.
I mean, we at CommonGood and myself, we've done a lot in affordable housing here in the U.S. I've also made some investments in Africa, housing over there. And sadly, the last 3 to 5 years, the general public is waking up to this idea that there's an affordability crisis. But I think it took a crisis to get everybody to see it.
That's the only good thing about COVID. It woke everybody up to how bad the situation is, and primarily how bad it is everywhere. For years, it was terrible in big cities, and we've always known that. But now literally every single community has this problem. There is a shortage of homes everywhere. They all cost too much. I mean, it couldn't have been better illustrated to me than this must have been 2017, somewhere around there. I was touring a small town in Iowa and came across a home that had 14 people living in it. English was not their first language, and it had a tarp as a roof, and they were paying $1,400 a month. And I just said that I don't even know how this is allowed. So to me, owning a home, the way this country has been set up, and this I think goes to your question of capital, this is the American dream. Home ownership is the American dream. That's how it was set up. That's what our entire financial system is based upon. It is what, right or wrong, this is what we've got. And frankly, that American dream has not been real for the majority of American families for decades. And so if we're going to solve our larger political problems, to me, this is the root. If you want people to succeed and thrive with whatever they're doing, wherever they live, whatever their families like, they need to have that bedrock of financial security. And that starts with owning a home.
All right. So then let's jump into that. My typical capital question and see, and if you've already answered, that's fine. But so when did you realize the power of capital? And then what does that mean to you? And if it's, first of all, is it different than what you just said? I guess what I'd say.
When I realized the power of capital, probably when I didn't have any. But I could tell you my real first realization of this was I owned a restaurant many years ago, and we undercapitalized to start the business because we wanted to borrow as little as possible. And it killed us. And that became a problem very quickly, right away. And that's when I first realized, oh, okay, so borrowing more was not necessarily a bad thing because it would help us ramp up. And so, but I still didn't have a real understanding of that until I got deep into the work I'm doing today in terms of what you need for home ownership. Not only are home prices unaffordable, but coming up with a down payment is unaffordable. The only reason why I was able to buy my first house was because the Obama administration gave us $8,000. That must have been 2009, somewhere around there. There was no way my family and I, with what we were currently making, could have afforded to buy just a very, very modest, I think it was a $160,000 home back then, which was a ton of money. Capital, when we live in a capitalistic society, whether that's good or bad depends on your perspective, but it is true. The power of capital is necessary for any human in this system to thrive.
Okay, let me go back. And this is a weird question. Not a weird question. It's worded weirdly, but so let's see if you can digest this one. How would you describe who you are in the context of where you're at in your life journey?
Who I am in the context of where I am.
Yeah, if you were to look at your totality of what you think your life will be, where are you at now and what are you doing in the context of this totality?
I incomplete. What percentage, I'm not sure, but I sometimes consciously and sometimes not find myself in situations where I know very little, where I am not an expert in any sense of this. And I go into things in order to solve problems and also because they interest me highly. Construction, I knew nothing about going into this. Technology, I knew nothing about. Certainly didn't know anything about robots or the housing market, I knew none of this. All I knew was that there was a problem and something that I found useful during this path is often it's the people that come in objectively or blindly into a system can achieve more quicker because they don't know what they don't know. And so there are many things that I probably wouldn't have done for this company or in this industry when we first started if I knew then what I know now. Because I would have said either that's a mistake, it's not going to work, or I would have said, well, that's not how things are normally done, so we should probably. I think that thinking is abhorrent. I think you should go into this with the intent to change the way a system is set up, not maliciously, but in order to improve it.
So then take 3D printing in the context of building homes. Describe to us how it fundamentally is changing or will change the historic conventional house building construction.
Most people would answer this question by saying the way it's going to change it is because we're going to have lower costs and stronger and more sustainable homes, and all of that is true, and that's going to happen over time. The way I'll answer the question is the number one way this is going to change the landscape is the amount of jobs this technology is going to create in markets where they don't currently exist. Construction is one of the largest industries in the world, and so it's necessary everywhere. But you take that and the rate of young people that want to go into the trades, you've got the need for homes going this way and the rate for people going into it going this way. And that's been true for probably 40 years, maybe more. And it's because the trades are often not safe. They may not pay as well as you want them to until you get to an experienced point. There's tons of regulation. It's frowned upon sometimes by people who don't think that that's either a real job or a good job or whatever, that not a job that requires a 4-year college degree. So you add all this up and the amount of people wanting to go into the trades have gone down. It's not sexy. It's not cool. It's not something people want to do. However, most people do want to build. They do want to work with their hands. They do want to create something, whether that's physically or mentally. This technology allows you to do all those things in a safer way, typically in a higher paid position, and normally without having to go anywhere close to a 4-year degree and go severely into debt. This is going to interest a lot of people. It already is interesting a lot of people, but there aren't enough options out there for training, nor are there enough companies to hire the people to be trained. So we're creating all of this at once, this entire industry. We're creating the demand, we're creating the talent pool, we're creating how to physically do it, we're creating the software, we're creating the robotics, we're building this entire thing from scratch. It's different than when, say, radio went to television. The communications industry already existed. And you could say that the construction industry already exists, which is true, but the industry for 3D concrete printing, it is being created right now completely from scratch. And that means we're going to have a ton of successes. We're going to have a ton of failures. We're going to have a ton of challenges. We're going to have a ton of interesting opportunities and things that we never would have thought. So here's a good example. 5 years ago, when I started this company, would I have ever thought that I would be printing for Walmart? No, not because that was crazy, just because that was not the goal. And in my mind, a company the size of Walmart is not going to adopt this type of brand new technology early on in the industry. And I was completely wrong. Not only have they adopted it, but they're going to grow this. But it's not just Walmart, it's other large companies that want to get into this work. Everybody understands that this is going to solve a problem. Some of those problems are being solved today with this technology. The rest we're still learning as we go.
So if you can divulge this, hypothetically Walmart or somebody else, what would be their main drivers from saying, yeah, let's do it this way versus traditional?
The easiest answer is save money.
And has that been proven out?
It has now. So the first one we did last year in Tennessee did not get proven out. That first project was not a money saver for them. However, we demonstrated enough promise for them to say, okay, let's do one more of these and let's see what happens. Because the first one, we had every single thing against us. It was in August in Tennessee. It was 110 degrees on the pad. So we had to literally go nocturnal. We printed from 9 p.m. to 6 a.m. So that was problem number one. Problem number two, it was a size 4 seismic zone. We and most other companies had never printed it. Problem number three, this was 8,000 square feet and 22 feet tall. Nothing has ever been commercially printed by us or any other company on the planet like that. Problem number four, the design was conservative and not efficient for 3D printing because we had nothing to do with design. It was already done and they handed it to us and they said, print this. So, and then of course, problem number five, we had new people we were training. Problem number six, we had never printed for this company. You can keep going. But those were the main issues. Given all of those odds, and I will say in the first week of printing, it was setting itself up to be a failure. Very, very challenging. But we finally had that breakthrough. And from then on, it was fairly smooth sailing. Now, when we finished that work, that took us 48 print days to do. And we had 8 humans on the job site and 2 robots. Now, the next one, they said, how do we get more efficient? And we said, number one, we need to design it with you. So we went to Bentonville. We sat side by side with their architects and their engineers, and we designed the next one together. That was the best thing we could do. Secondly, we got the material company involved, and they began talking to us about the best possible way to do this. We reconfigured our robots to better be able to print a structure like this. We trained our teams. We rehearsed. We did so many other things that we had not done for the first one. And so on the second one, we were able to finish the second in 7 print days, 75 print hours with 5 humans and 2 robots. And we set a record and we showed Walmart that there was real savings up front, not just the savings that you're going to get on the ancillary, on the energy usage and things like that, but real true savings. And that's when they said, whoa, okay, we get it. We want to do so many more.
Congratulations to you and your team for winning that, getting it done. You'll be a better company for going through all those challenges. So another question I'd love to ask, and again, you may have already answered is, and this can be, you can think of this in a big way or small way, but how would you say you're trying to change the world?
So I'll answer the small way first by trying to teach my kids that anything is possible. And would I work with them every day on that? I would say building community is what I'm always trying to do. Whether that's literally building it by building a structure or building community by getting 2 people that would never otherwise associate with each other to communicate in a friendly way in the same place. And that's always been my goal. I left Brooklyn a long time ago because everybody around me agreed with my point of view at the time. And I felt that it was obviously a place like New York is very diverse culturally, but it's not very diverse ideologically. And I wanted to understand why people thought the way they thought, who thought differently than I did, because I didn't understand it. Because of the where I had grown up was very one-sided. We all think this way. And I naturally agreed with that and still agree with a lot of those thoughts. But I needed to meet other people and understand why they would think this way because I couldn't possibly fathom. Now, almost 18 years later, and being around so many different types of people with different types of points of view and coming from different places, I have a much more seasoned look on how the world works. My own thoughts have changed. which is natural, of course. But if I'm trying to change the world, it has to do with who am I talking to right now, right in this in this scenario? How do we differ and how can we find common ground? And then how do you transfer that to other people?
And do you know why you had the intrigue or the interest, the curiosity to learn about other people? Because I mean, there's many people who grow up probably in your environment and they don't walk away with that the way you're walking away with it. Was there something that happened? Why is community such a big thing to you? Which, by the way, I don't disagree, but I'm not so sure not everybody thinks that way.
Well, I think everybody thinks that community is important, especially in their own immediate. Sometimes their community could just mean their, so that's fine. There were a lot of different things that I'll give you. There's a lot of ways to say this, but my favorite story is when I had first moved to Des Moines and we had just started the social club and we were trying to figure out how to get this moving, and we had this makeshift building that was held together by dirt. We had a theater in the back, a piece of crap theater, and we had a little bar in the front with a cabaret stage, and we started doing shows. And the first groups that came in to rent our theater was a group called 3X Wrestling, and they do WWE style wrestling. Now, I never thought we'd have wrestlers in our theater, but they had money, so we said yes. So they started renting our theater once a month to do their wrestling shows. And at the same time, totally coincidentally, in the bar, we booked a jazz and poetry night at the same time. Now, these are two worlds that would typically not be caught dead socialized together. And so the first night, everybody came down, they got drinks from the bar, and they ran off in opposite directions. Second month, same thing. For the third month, something really interesting happened. The wrestlers were on their intermission, and they were coming into the bar to get drinks and run back to the theater to avoid the poets because they're so scary. But there were these two guys, about 6'5", full leotards, standing a little bit away from me, drinking a beer and watching the poetry. And they suddenly turned to me and they said, "Hey, are you the guy who runs this place?" I said, "Yeah." And they asked if they could talk to me in private. So we sat down in my office. I asked what I could do. And they said, "Listen, we'd love to get more involved." And I said, "Great. We're a nonprofit. Here's 10 different volunteer opportunities." And they said, "Yeah, we had something else in mind." And they looked around to make sure that nobody was listening. And they whispered, "We both write poetry." And they asked if they could read their poems at the club. And I said, "Sure, it's an open mic. Anybody can." And that began our wrestling and poetry evenings. And so the following month, these two guys, they came out, they went and wrestled, they came out, they got on stage, they read their poems, which were pretty good, and then went back and wrestled some more. The following month, people who were their friends came out to watch the poetry at first to support them. And then they kind of got into it. 2 months later, the poets, encouraged by all this new behavior, said we should probably go check out what they do. They went in to watch the wrestling, and they walked out saying, "That was awesome." 10 months in, we had to change the times of the program so people could go to both. Now, this was in 2008 during the Iowa caucuses, back when they had meeting. And the political conversations happening in this room until 2 a.m. were some of the most natural, organic conversations. People that disagreed with each other almost entirely on every issue were standing there, drinking a beer with each other and having a civil conversation. Now, we don't think minds were being changed, but relationships were being formed. And we stood back and watched this and we said, okay, how do we replicate this every night? And so what we tried to do was to book at least 2 different events every single night that tried to draw as opposite crowds as possible. And so that was a big light bulb moment for me, but it was also a lot of fun.
I love that story because we all can relate to how our own perception of wrestlers and poetry and to see them come together. I mean, they're both I would have loved to have seen that. Is that still happening?
They don't, I don't know if they still do it today. The social club, unfortunately, closed, I think, in 2020. I know those folks are still around. I don't know if it's happening on the same night.
Well, one of the things I should tell the audience here is that Zach and I met, I don't know, let's just say a month ago, something like that. I wear another hat with a group called Promising People, and we essentially are training men and women behind bars with virtual reality. And so we got in contact through some relationships. Part of the idea is to put his courses on how to do this into the headsets to take into prison so that as they get trained and get released, there could be a natural workforce for you and for this industry. And I bring that up because, I've been doing stuff in prisons for 34 years, started when I was a freshman in college. And it's the same type of thing as most people look at people in prison and go, I got nothing in common with these people. These guys are thugs or whatever. Then you get in and have a dialogue and sure, some of them fit the stereotype, but not the majority of them. To see inmates crying because they couldn't be at their sister's child's birth or whatever. Like, that's not a paradigm of how you picture these men. And so I'm anxious to see how this works out with Promising People, because as you've already said, outside the walls, I mean, community is important, and so is housing. Well, the same thing is true with men who are behind bars. And frankly, when they get out, the community that they struggle to find is just massive. So it's so hard. And then obviously the need for a job is so critical. So I think, and you probably already know this, but you will find in the prison system, there are some amazing people with amazing skill sets that I think would just, be awesome at what you're doing. You've got some pretty big plans that you're working on and things that you're dreaming about. I don't know if the word stewardship comes up in your vernacular at all, but how do you view stewardship and how are you trying to live that out?
I mean, we're stewards of our clients, we're stewards of our staff, we're stewards of just the community as a whole. You could look at our business like you could any business and say, on the one hand, we have this business because we want to make money, which of course is true. And there's nothing wrong with that. And that's what everybody has to do as long as we live in a capitalistic society. So that's where we are. However, the mission of the organization, we do have a mission, and that is to help put people back into the American dream, help make buildings more sustainable and greener and better for our planet, help create community wherever we're going. We are stewards of our mission. And we have to remember that. It'd be very easy to go down a pathway of, well, we're just going to print retaining walls and gutter systems forever and make our money and be fine. And we could. And we will do those things, but not only those things. We have to remember the original mission of the organization, and we are stewards to that.
I love the way you answered that, because on the other hand, you want a sustainable business so you can go do that. So I'm projecting that you took those opportunities with Walmart, not that it is your number one priority to build for Walmart, but on the other hand, it probably gives you the capital, you can learn and all that kind of stuff so that you can hone your craft to go do what you ultimately want to do. And so I think it's a good lesson for all of us, because when you get in this impact investing world or and I don't want to confuse the two, you get in the philanthropic world, it's like, well, if you're doing this over here and it's not completely your mission, somehow you failed. And it's like, well, no, sometimes you need to pivot a little bit. You got to stay afloat.
That's right. I mean, this is startup life. Yep. Startup life is exciting and horrible at the same time. And yeah, I don't recommend it, but I will say that yes, you do have to pivot. And yes, having a client like Walmart is not something we ever, of course, want to say no to. It's less about the impact of what that does for our bottom line. And it's more about how much can we learn in this process. That's the true thing that Walmart has afforded us, is the ability, going from project 1 to project 2 was really, in my opinion, we'll be able to tell 20 years from now, that's what built this company. That's when we learned it. That was our breakthrough. We had periods of success prior to that, but nothing close to that moment. There's other benefits to this. And frankly, if you want to talk about stewardship, it's being a steward to any and all. Everybody needs help, and we should be working with everybody. There shouldn't be anything that we exclude.
So it's interesting you say that. When I got my MBA, so I guess that would have been 2004 to 2006, a lot of the case studies were Walmart, and a lot of them were on the negative side. And so, even hearing this, it's a great reminder, and translate this to companies, translates this to people. They're typically not either good or bad. There's probably some play between both of them. And so here you look at Walmart, and if you go off of the perception that I had based on, going through my MBA school, however many years ago, and yet you see that Walmart is probably venturing out in a space where a lot of other smaller companies can't do it. And they're going to allow you to hone your skills. You're going to make a difference for them, and they're going to make a difference for you. And so it even goes back to your concept of community and not shunning somebody just because they view things a little bit differently. You still can work together and accomplish things. And I'm assuming in the same light, there's nothing wrong to have discord. I mean, you told Walmart, look, to do another one, I need to actually come down and do this together. And so you probably have a much better relationship with them today than you did when you started. So
yeah, they got excited about that, and today we have a great relationship, and they are a lot of folks probably wouldn't think of Walmart as an innovative company, and they are by far one of the most innovative companies on, and they've changed their perception greatly over the last 10 to 20 years, and they're continuing to do that. And when you've got companies of this size, they're going to be scrutinized. They're also going to be celebrated. And so I didn't know much about the inner workings of Walmart, obviously, before we started doing this work. I know a decent amount today, and it has been a wonderful ride with them of being able to learn side by side. They are as much, if not more, excited about this technology as we are.
Well, what's interesting is if you take that same concept, in the impact investing space, and I'm not saying I fall into this personally, but the larger companies can be shunned easier. And yet I've always said on the side that says, well, yeah, but a lot of these big companies, if they make minor tweaks, the impact they can have is massive to any startup that they're going to have. And so usually it's just a matter of having a dialogue and finding alignment in different areas. And I'm assuming the alignment there is, hey, we want this stuff cheaper. We want it faster. And you can do that and deliver, the other environmental benefits. It's a home run for everybody.
Exactly. And that last part is one of the big things that gets glossed over and forgotten, is that they do want it better and cheaper and faster, of course, but they also want this to have more of a positive impact on the environment. And frankly, I don't think enough companies are thinking that direction. Walmart definitely is, and we're a small piece of it.
Okay, last question. If you could have one dream come true, and it could be more than one if you want, and I can take your family out of it if that helps you, but if you could have a dream come true, what would that be?
I immediately go to, I want my kids to be happy and healthy, but taking my family out of it, one dream to come true would be for everybody to venture outside of their comfort zone and their little bubble where they live and work on a regular basis. They don't have to agree with, but to understand the perspective of the other, of the person opposite them, is to respect it, not agree. They don't have to agree, but to understand why a certain person thinks the way that they do. I think if everybody could do that, the world would be a much better place.
All right. I'm going to add one more question. So we're talking 3D printing, I think of houses. I'm assuming you've thought about this. If not, that's fine. If you had from scratch you pick it, whatever, whether it's 30 acres, whether it's 500 acres, if somebody gave you the money and gave you the freedom to say, now go build the community that you want. Have you thought about, would it look different? I mean, I'm assuming it's built by 3D printing, but how else would it look different from what we're used to seeing?
If I had a blank check to build a community, yes, it would be done with 3D. Probably other technologies would be involved as well, but every component of every home, of every structure would be 3D printed out of all types of materials, not just concrete. It would be designed entirely by the homeowners themselves, every little bit of it, every doorknob, every drawer pull, every bathtub, every fence, every door, everything would be designed by the individual who's going to end up owning it. And in some cases, they would print it themselves. The products that they're using, any waste inside their home, would be recycled for them to be able to print other things for their homes in the future. There would be shared community space where you have larger 3D printers that everybody can utilize in their area. Culturally, they would be able to utilize all of the art forms would be in that walkable community. Every store, everything that you need to purchase would be available there, provided locally and provided by the community itself. And yeah, I think that does it.
Had you thought about that before?
Of course.
I was saying, because you answered it like you had. Yeah, very cool. Well, Zach, thanks for taking the time. It's just fun one of the opportunities and the things that I love doing here is talking with people who are not just talking about doing stuff, but are risking and doing. And that's exactly what you're doing. And so I'm anxious to see where this goes. I hope that one day you will have your blank check and you can, or at least help design one of these communities. and then we'll go from there. So anyways, thanks so much. Anything you want to say in closing?
Thank you. Great questions. Great interview. Great discussion. Thank you.
So just so everybody knows, if they want to find out more about you, put it in the description, whatnot. But where can they find you?
Alquist3d.com. My contact info's on there. Feel free to reach out to me directly. I'm also pretty active on LinkedIn.
Wonderful. Well, don't forget to subscribe to New Lens with CommonGood Capital on your podcast app of choice. This will help new listeners find the show and hopefully put them on a path to more fulfilling portfolio within the impact investing space. Zach, thanks so much, and have a great day. This podcast is a production of CommonGood Capital. It does not constitute an offer or a solicitation of an offer. Such offer would only be made through a private placement memorandum. Prospective investors in private placement securities should be aware that making an investment is speculative and involves a high degree of risk, including the risk of losing all or a portion of an investment. Investments of this nature are illiquid and subject to substantial restrictions upon transferability.